This is the inevitable collapse of Ukraine. The Ukraine venture was unsustainable. Militarily, Ukraine simply can't slug it out with Russia. Even when backed by the material and financial assistance of Europe and the United States. We're now seeing Ukraine economically. It's a literal basket case. There is no functioning economy. It's all artificial, propped up, corrupt as the day is long. We see, a very difficult winter approaching for Ukraine. Their energy infrastructure has been, taken out. They're now going to the generator economy, which means that prices for everything, even under, optimal conditions, will rise, 20-25% this winter. And that's 20-25% in already dysfunction. When an economy survives only on foreign money, when infrastructure is reduced to generators, and when basic prices spiral inside a non-functioning system, the battlefield quietly shifts from soldiers to civilians. At that point, the war is no longer being lost at the front lines. It's being lost in kitchens, power grids, and public trust. And once that trust breaks, political collapse is no longer a prediction. It's simply the next phase. All around Zelensky, the walls are falling. I don't know how much longer he can hold on. If he's capable of holding on. If people want him to hold on. He was always a figurehead. Around which different power structures were constructed. And we see now one of the big power structures, the all talk, no action. They're incapable of any real action. I'm not worried about any escalation from Europe because they can't escalate. They have nothing to escalate with. So it comes down to the United States managing the fall of Ukraine. And this, in the end, is, what we're witnessing here. Is this a helping hand, or is this a euthanasia? We don't know exactly what's happening right now. One thing we do know is that Russia's in the catbird seat here. They're driving this. This isn't collapse by explosion. It's collapse by erosion. Power structures disappear first. Then authority follows. Europe's paralysis only speeds it up. When the goal shifts from winning to merely managing the fall, the outcome is already decided. At that point, help becomes control, and momentum has already changed hands. All they have to do is sit back and literally point to the scoreboard. Anytime the United States, tries to play tough with sanctions, just point to the scoreboard, because Russia just keeps scoring every day, more and more, and there's nothing left for the Ukrainians. So we're approaching total collapse of the military, and when that happens, it's over. It's unconditional surrender. And so, the United States, in many ways, it's a race against the clock to see if they can get Ukraine to, agree to something that allows, something called Ukraine that isn't totally controlled by Russia to exist, or if Russia just gets everything at once. When one side only has to point at results instead of make arguments, the contest is already decided. Sanctions lose, meaning when momentum keeps moving in one direction. What's unfolding now isn't strategy. It's a race to salvage what little sovereignty can still be preserved before collapse turns negotiation into surrender. History's unambiguous on this point. Great powers have always tolerated corruption in client states as long as it served strategic goals. From South Vietnam in the 1960s to Afghanistan. After 2001, Washington repeatedly backed fragile, corrupt systems for short-term leverage, only to watch them collapse under their own weight. Corruption isn't a side effect of proxy wars. It's often the foundation that ultimately destroys them. And some could say benefited from Ukrainian corruption. So long as Ukraine was able to deliver the goods on the battlefield, to, have a robust defense, carry out, counteroffenses on call, invade Kursk. All these things, the United States held their nose. I mean, it was so blatantly obvious when Congress would not even allow, auditing mechanisms to be put in place. Because they know the truth. The truth has been known from day one that Ukraine is fundamentally corrupt from the top to the bottom. Of Ukraine that's not corrupt. Even the anti-corruption forces, they don't work for Ukraine. They appear to have been, constructed at the behest of the United States as a mechanism of control according to, Ukrainian telegram channels. You could take that as a grain of salt, but historically, they've actually, I wouldn't quote him except that historically they've been fairly accurate in reading the tea leaves of Ukrainian politics and calling things out. They say things, and then a couple weeks later, it turns out what they said was true. So they say that that the NABU, the anti-corruption organ, has the goods not just on Yermak, but on Zelensky. That they have his voice knee deep in this current, Machinik or whatever the guy's name is, Michnuk, corruption scheme. But we've known this. I mean, that's why this isn't a shock. We know that they take a cut of everything that this power. This is how they build, power structures. This pattern is older than modern warfare itself. In proxy conflicts, corruption is often tolerated, even quietly exploited, as long as the client state produces battlefield results. South Vietnam in the 1960s and Afghanistan after 2001 followed the same script. Money flows, oversight disappears, and power concentrates at the top. Anti-corruption bodies then become tools of control, not reform. What looks like governance is really leverage. And when exposure finally comes, it never shocks historians, only the public. But Erdogan now complained that and expressed concern given that there had been attacks on a Russian oil tanker within Turkey's economic zone. Do you see this as being a desperate, I guess, attacks towards the end of a war, or trying to prove that Russia can be beaten? Or how well, what are the risks of these attacks, though? We're talking about Ukrainian, naval drones. This is a 100% British-driven operation. And it's the Brits have been, screaming the loudest about the Shadow Fleet influencing the Balts to do things. So, this is just a desperate act on the part of Great Britain. It'll have zero impact. I mean, these aren't Russian ships. I think, one was Panamanian flag, Turkish-owned Panamanian flag. The others were, Ghana or something. African-flagged ships. Yeah, they're part of the so-called Shadow Fleet of uninsured or vessels that are outside the Lloyd's insurance umbrella that Russia can rely upon to move, oil. Despite, the British-driven sanctions. But it's just going to backfire. I mean, already we see, Turkey, condemning Ukraine's action. Kazakhstan and nations that were sympathetic to the Ukrainian cause are now, shouting out. They attack costing. The Kazakh, over $1 billion, That's how long do you have diplomatic support when you pull stupid, do stupid stunts like this? So this is just British stupidity. This history shows that attacks on neutral or third-party commercial assets rarely weaken the enemy. They widen the war politically. From British maritime pressure in the First World War to tanker conflicts in the Persian Gulf during the 1980s, the result was never strategic victory, only the collapse of diplomatic support. When operations begin harming nations like Turkey or Kazakhstan, the conflict stops being about Ukraine and starts becoming about reckless escalation. And at that moment, sympathy turns into isolation fast. This is the Brits, step off a lit, boys. We're going to stick it into the very end. Yes, stand your ground. The thin red line. Except the Brits aren't dying. It's the Ukrainians' price, and they're going to pay a horrible price. They will be abandoned by everybody when this is done. Nobody likes them. I said this from the very beginning. The only thing that makes Ukraine attractive is the money that goes into people's pockets. There's nothing attractive about Ukraine. It's not a functioning democracy. People don't look to it and say this is the model we want to follow. Boys, good old, Poroshenko democracy. European equivalent of Jeffersonian democracy. Nobody likes the Ukrainians. Nobody respects the Ukrainians. Everybody despises the Ukrainians. But so long as Ukraine is able to funnel money into people's pockets, and it can be used to, empower people geopolitically. I mean, hell, Europe's had a great moment there, allowing the Ukrainians to die by the hundreds of thousands for them. But it's over, and Ukraine will be abandoned. This is the brutal history of proxy wars. The ones who urge resistance rarely pay the price themselves. When strategic value fades, so does loyalty. And the abandoned are always the ones who bled the most. You know, the Russians will think that they won. Wow. So the Russians are really the dumbest people on the planet. They're children, and you can hand them, a lollipop, and tell them it's dinner, or something like that. No. The Russians are the smartest people at the table right now. Their diplomatic corps is genius. Do they make mistakes? Everybody makes mistakes. But Russia knows exactly what's going on. Putin has said from the very beginning that this war won't be over until the root causes of the conflict are resolved permanently. So what the hell does Europe think they're going to do? You think Russia is going to sit there go, okay, yeah, we were just kidding. We're not going to solve the root causes. We're going to leave Ukraine there so that you can them up 10 years from now, and we can do this all over again. That isn't going to happen. There will be no peace deal that allows this to happen. None, zero, and Russia's in the driver's seat. This reveals a basic misunderstanding of how great powers think. Nations don't fight long wars for symbolic wins. They fight to remove future threats permanently. When one side controls momentum, it doesn't negotiate for appearances. It dictates terms for finality. And once a war reaches that stage, compromise becomes a myth. There's no pressure that could be brought on Russia right now to make them change their mind. None. And right now we have the Trump administration solely focused on financial gain. I mean, traditional geopolitical thinking's out the window right now. Europe is nobody cares. That's just the reality. You don't matter. It's just over. They're not even coordinating with you. Not even calling you. Meeting, with the Ukrainians, and Rubio doesn't even get to make a phone call to Europe. He doesn't get to go to... Rubio just gets to go back and play, Venezuela games. Woodoff and Jared are off to Moscow to do the thing. Why? It's all a business deal right now. And I'll tell you what, Russia has far greater business potential than Ukraine does. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to sway the United States. If Ukraine doesn't want to play games, then Russia will absorb Ukraine. And Trump has already acknowledged this. And then the United States will indirectly be able to reap the benefits of Ukrainian resources by having business deals with Russia. But this is coming down to one giant business deal. Is it going to succeed? I don't know. I don't know if Trump has the ability to pull this off, because there is a lot of political opposition to this in the United States, and there is midterm elections coming up. So on. Idea that you're going to strong-arm Russia into accepting a deal that doesn't give Russia what it's going to get if it just continues fighting. And there's nothing anybody can do to stop this outcome on the battlefield. It's over. It's all over but the dying. When wars are reduced to balance sheets, diplomacy turns into bargaining, not peacemaking. Power follows momentum, not sentiment. And once the battlefield outcome is settled, every negotiation becomes merely a discussion about terms of surrender, not prevention. There's a lot more Ukrainians that could be killed, and Russia, tragically, is willing to kill them. If that's what it takes. But Europe is non. It doesn't even register anymore. It's embarrassing to be European today. Literally, I'm sorry, but you earned it. You earned it through your sheer incompetence and your lack of ethics and your lack of morality and your lack of anything. And now you're paying the price because there's nothing there. I mean, I don't know how many times I have to hear Germany and France and everybody talk about this 800,000-man army that they're going to build. Good luck. I wish you the best. Please build it. That'll just further your collapse because you can't afford it. And there 800,000 Europeans ready to fight and die for your cause already in Germany. You know what? 16% of the I think that number is dropping as we speak. 16% are willing to die for Germany if they're invaded. How many of them willing to die for Germany if Germany invades somebody else? So this Europe's just irrelevant. It comes down to Trump. And can Trump, gain this system? And we'll see. I'd like to know just what he has on Ukraine, because remember, the problem with corruption is a two-way street. And if you start playing the corruption card, it may come home to roost. Meaning, you may find out things about American politicians you don't really want to find out. What this ultimately exposes is the quiet collapse of moral authority alongside strategic failure. When proxy wars replace accountability and politics become transactional, the consequences don't stay contained to the battlefield. They return home. And as Scott Ritter warns here, corruption never travels in one direction. When power games are played long enough, the truth eventually turns inward.